Without a Shirt by Paul Jennings. Mr. Bush looked at the class. "Brian Bell," he said, "you can be the first one to give your history talk." My heart sank. I felt sick inside. I didn't want to do it. I hated talking in front of the class. "Yes, Mr. Bush, without a shirt," I said. Sue Featherstone, daughter of the mayor, giggled. Slowly I walked out to the front of class. I felt like death warmed up. My mouth was dry. "I'm going to talk about my great-great-grandfather," I said. "He was a sailor. He brought supplies to Warrnambool Bull with his boat, without a shirt." 30 pairs of eyes were looking at me. Sue Featherstone was grinning. "Why didn't he wear a shirt?" she asked. She knew the answer. She knew all right. She just wanted to hear me say it. "His name was Byron. People called him Old Ben Byron, without a shirt." "Why did they call him Old Ben Byron, without a shirt?" Sue asked with a smirk. "That's a funny name." "Oh, don't tease him," said Mr. Bush. "He's doing his best." She was a mean girl, that Sue Featherstone. Real mean. She knew I couldn't help saying "without a shirt" after every sentence. I always said "without a shirt." All my life I'd done it. I just couldn't help it. Don't ask me why. I don't know why. I just couldn't stop myself. I had been to dozens of doctors. None of them knew what caused it, and none of them could cure me. I hated doing it. Everyone laughed. They thought I was a bit weird. I looked at Sue Featherstone. "Don't be mean," I said. "Stop stirring. You know I can't stop saying without a shirt, without a shirt." The whole class cracked up. A whole lot of the kids tried not to laugh, but they just couldn't stop. They thought it was very funny. I went red in the face. I wish I was dead. I wished that Sue Featherstone was dead too. She was the worst one in the class. She was always picking on me. "Okay, Brian," said Mr. Bush. "You can do your talk on Wednesday. You might be feeling a bit better by then." I went and sat down. Mr. Bush felt sorry for me. They all kind of felt sorry for me. Everyone except Sue Featherstone, that is. She never thought about anyone except herself. I walked home from school with Shovel. Shovel is my dog. He's called Shovel because he loves to dig holes. Nothing can stop him from digging holes. He digs up old rubbish and brings it home and leaves it on our doorstep. Once, the man next door went fishing. He had a sack of mussels which he used for bait. When he got home, he left them in the boot of his car, forgot about them. 2 weeks later he found them. Or should I say, they found him. What a stink. Boy, were they on the nose. He had to bury them in his backyard. The next day, Shovel dug them up, brought them home for me. He was always giving me presents like that. I didn't have the heart to punish him. He meant well. I just patted him on the head and said, "Good boy," without a shirt. Shovel was a great dog. Terrific, in fact. I'm the first to admit that he didn't look like much. He only had one eye, and half of one ear was gone. He was always scratching. That wasn't his fault. It was the fleas. He just couldn't get rid of the fleas. I bought flea collars, but they didn't work. I think that was because Shovel loved to roll around in cow manure so much. Apart from those few little things, you wouldn't find a better dog than Shovel. He was always friendly and loved to jump on you and give you a lick on the face. Mum and I could never give him up. He was all we had left to remember Dad by. Shovel used to belong to Dad once, but Dad was killed in a car accident, so now there was just me, Shovel, and Mum. When I reached home, I locked Shovel in the backyard. It didn't look much like a backyard, more like a battlefield with bomb holes all over it. Shovel had dug up holes everywhere. It was no good filling them in. He would just dig them up again. I went into the kitchen to get a drink. I could hear Mum talking to someone in the lounge. It was Mrs. Featherstone, wife of the mayor. She owned our house. We rented it from her. She was tall and skinny and had blue hair. She always wore a long string of pearls, real ones, and spoke in a posh voice. "Mrs. Bell," she was saying, "I'm afraid you'll have to find another place to live. It just won't do. That dog has dug holes everywhere. The backyard looks like a surface of the moon. Either you get rid of the dog or you leave this house. "Oh, we couldn't do that," said Mum. "Brian loves that dog, and it used to belong to his father. No, we couldn't give Shovel away." Just then Shovel appeared at the window. He had something in his mouth. "There is that dreadful creature now," said Mrs. Featherstone. "And what's that in its mouth?" I rushed into the room. "Don't worry, it's only Tibbles without a shirt." "Tibbles!" squeaked Mrs. Featherstone. "What is Tibbles?" "Our cat," I told her. "It died 6 months ago, and I buried it at the bottom of the yard without a shirt." Mrs. Featherstone screamed. Then she fainted. I don't know what all the fuss was about. It was only a dead cat. I know that Tibbles didn't look quite the same as he was when he was alive, but was that any reason to go and faint? Anyhow, that's how we got kicked out of our house, and that's why we had to go live in the cemetery. When I mean we had to live in a cemetery, no, I don't mean that we lived in a grave or anything like that. No, we lived in a house in the middle of the cemetery. It was a big, dark old house. Once the caretaker lived there, but he was gone now, and no one else wanted to live in it. That's why the rent was cheap. It was all that we could afford. Mum was on the pension, and we didn't have much money. "You'll be happy here," said the estate agent to Mum. "It's very quiet, and it's the cheapest house in town." "I don't think anyone can be happy in a graveyard," said Mum. "But I'll have to do for now. It's all we can afford." The agent walked off to his car. He was smiling about something. Then he looked at Shovel. "I hope your dog doesn't dig holes," he said. "It's not a good idea for dogs that live in the cemetery to dig holes." He thought he had said something really funny. He was still laughing as he drove out the gate. "Big joke, without a shirt," I called after him. The next day we moved in. I had a little room at the top of the house. I looked out over the graves. I could see the sea close by. The cemetery was next to the beach. We just had to walk over the sand dunes, and there we were, Lady Bay Beach. I went up to my room and started to work on my talk for school. I decided to write the whole thing. That way I could make sure I didn't have any without a shirts in it. I didn't want to give Sue Featherstone the chance to laugh at me again. The only trouble was that the last time I tried this, it didn't work. I still said the without shirts anyway. Still, it was worth a try. It might work this time. This is what I wrote. Old Ben Byron. Old Ben Byron was my great-great-grandfather. He was the captain of a sailing ship. He sailed in with all sorts of goods for the town. He was one of the early settlers. This town is only here because of men like Ben Byron. One day a man fell overboard. My great-great-grandfather jumped over to help him. The man was saved, but old Ben Byron was swept away. He drowned. His body was never found. I know this might seem a bit short for a talk at school. I mean, it is, but something happened that stopped me writing anymore. Shovel had been gone for some time. I was starting to worry. I hoped he wasn't scratching around any of the graves. I looked out the window and saw him coming. I ran downstairs and let him in. He ran straight up into my room and dropped something on the floor. It was a bone. I picked up the bone and I looked at it. It's very small and pointed. Just one little white bone. I could tell it was old. I knew I'd seen a bone like that somewhere before, but I couldn't think of where. A funny feeling started to come over me. Felt lonely and lost, all alone. Felt as if I was dead and under the sea, rolling over and over. My hand started to shake, and I dropped the bone, stared down at the bone on the floor. I was in bare feet, and the bone had fallen right next to my little toe. Then I knew what sort of bone it was. It was a bone from someone's toe. It was a human toe bone. "Oh no," I said to Shovel. "What have you done? Where have you been digging, you bad dog? You've dug up a grave. Now we're in trouble. Big trouble. If anyone finds out, we'll be thrown out of this house too. We'll have nowhere to live without a shirt." I put on my shoes and ran outside. The strange feeling left me as soon as I closed the bedroom door. I only felt sad when I was near the bone. Outside it was cold and windy. I could hear the high seas crashing on the other side of the sand dunes. "Show me where you got it," I yelled at Shovel. "Show me which grave it was without a shirt." Shovel didn't seem to listen. He ran over the sand dunes to the beach and left me on my own. I looked at all the graves. There were thousands and thousands of them. It's a very old cemetery, and most of the graves were overgrown. Started walking from one grave to another, trying to find signs of digging. Searched all afternoon, but I found nothing. Couldn't find the place where Shovel had dug up the bone. In the end, I walked sadly back to the house. I didn't know what to do with the bone. If anyone found it, there would be a terrible fuss. I would be forced to leave the cemetery and would have nowhere to live. When I reached the house, Shovel was waiting for me. He was wagging his tail. He looked pleased with himself. He was covered in sand, and in his mouth he had another tiny bone. "The beach!" I shouted. "You found it at the beach!" without a shirt. I snatched the bone from Shovel. As soon as I touched the bone, the same sad feeling came over me. I felt lost and alone, wanted something, but I didn't know what it was. It was another toe bone. I carried it up to my room, put it next to the other one. The feeling of sadness grew less. "That's strange," without a shirt, I said to Shovel. I picked up the bone, put it outside the door. The feeling came back. It was very strong. I opened the door and put the two bones together again. I didn't quite feel so sad. "These bones are not happy unless they're together," I said. "They want to be together," without a shirt. I decided to have a serious talk to Shovel. I took his head between my hands. "Listen," I said. "You have to show me where you found these bones. We'll have to fill in the hole. You can't go digging up dead bodies all over the place. You just can't," without a shirt. Shovel looked at me with that big brown eye. I had the feeling that Shovel knew more about this than I did. He ran over to the door and started scratching it. "Okay," I told him. "I'll come with you, but first I'll hide these bones without a shirt." I put the two toe bones in the drawer with my socks. They still felt sad, and so did I. As soon as I closed the drawer again, the feeling went. We headed off to the beach. It was blowing a gale. Sand blew into my eyes and my ears, and I didn't know what to expect. Maybe a big hole that Shovel had dug, with a skeleton in the bottom. Maybe a body washed up on the beach. We climbed over the sand dunes and down to the shore. There was no one else on the beach. It was too cold. "Well," I said to Shovel, "show me where you got the bones," without a shirt. He ran off to the sand dunes to a small hole. It was only as deep as my hand. There was no grave, just the small hole. I dug around with my hand, but there were no other bones. "That's good," I told Shovel. "There's no grave, and there's no body, just two toe bones. Tomorrow I'll bury them, and that will be the end of it," without a shirt. Shovel didn't listen. He ran off to the other end of the beach. It was a long way, but I decided to follow him. When I reached him, he was digging another hole. He found two more toe bones. I picked them up, and straight away I felt that sad, sad feeling come over me. "They want to be with the others," I said. "See if you can find any more," without a shirt. Shovel ran from one end of the beach to the other. He dug about 30 holes. In each hole he found one or two bones. Some of them were quite big. I found an old plastic bag on the beach, and I put the bones in it. By the time it was dark, the bag was full of unhappy bones. I felt like crying, and I didn't know why. Even Shovel was sad. His tail was drooping. There wasn't one wag left in it. I started to walk up the sand dunes towards home. Shovel didn't want to go. He started digging one more hole. It was a deep hole. He disappeared right inside it. At last he came out with something in his mouth. But it wasn't a bone. It was a shoe. A very old shoe. It wasn't anything like the shoes you buy in the shops. It had a gold buckle on the top. I couldn't see it properly in the dark. I wanted to take it home and have a good look at it. "Come on, Shovel," I said. "Let's go home. Mum will be wondering where we are," without a shirt. I picked up the bag and we walked slowly back to the house. I put the two toe bones in the bag with the rest of them. Then I put the bag in my cupboard and shut the door. I felt much happier when the bones were locked away. They were unhappy, and they made me unhappy. I knew what the trouble was. They wanted to be with all the other bones. I guessed that they were all buried in different places along the beach. I looked at the shoe. It was all twisted and old. It had been buried in the sand dunes for a long time. I wondered who it was. Then I noticed something. Two initials were carved into the bottom. I could just read them. They were B.B. "Ben Byron!" I shouted. "The bones belong to my great-great-grandfather," without a shirt. I suddenly thought of something. Ben Byron's shoe had reminded me. Tomorrow was Wednesday. I had to give my history talk at school. I groaned. I knew that I wouldn't be able to sleep worrying about it, and the more I worried, the more nervous I would get. The more nervous I got, the worse I would feel, and the last time I had to give a talk at school, I got 1 out of 10. 1 out of 10, you couldn't get much lower than that. Then I had an idea. I would take along the shoe. I would tell everyone that I'd found Ben Byron's shoe. That would make it interesting. Might even get 3 out of 10 for my talk if I had the shoe. Put the shoe in my sock drawer and took the bag of bones out of the cupboard. I wanted to have a closer look at them. I tipped the bones into a pile on the floor. There were 3 long bones and a lot of small ones. A sad, lonely feeling came over me once more. I sat down on the bed and I looked at the pile of sad bones. Then something happened that gave me a shock. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. Couldn't believe what I was seeing. The bones were moving. They were slowly moving around the floor. The bones were creeping around each other like a pile of snakes. The bones sorted themselves out. They all fitted together. They formed themselves into a foot, and then a leg. All the bones were in the right order. I had the skeleton of Ben Byron's leg. The leg didn't move. It just lay there on the floor. I sat on the bed looking at it for a long time. I can tell you I was scared, real scared, but I couldn't just leave the leg there. Mum might come in and see it. Anyway, it was creepy having the skeleton of someone else's leg lying on your bedroom floor. In the end, I jumped up and swept all of the bones back into the bag and threw it into the corner of the room. Then I climbed into bed, put my head under the blanket. I just tried to pretend that the bones weren't there. The next day, I had to give my talk at school. It went worse than I thought. It was terrible. I stood in front of the class for ages without saying anything. I was so scared that my knees were knocking. The words just wouldn't come out. "What's up?" said Sue Featherstone. "Haven't you got any shirts today?" A big laugh went up. I managed to read the whole thing through to the end. I tried not to say anything else. I could feel it building up inside of me. It was like a bomb wanting to go off. I kept my mouth closed tight, but the words were trying to get out. My cheeks blew out and my face went red. "Look at him," laughed Sue Featherstone. "He's trying not to say it." It was no good. The words exploded out. "Without a shirt!" I was embarrassed. I didn't know what to do. I grabbed the shoe. "And this is Ben Byron's shoe," I said. "It washed ashore without a shirt." "It is not," said Sue Featherstone. "It's an old shoe you found at the tip." Everything was going wrong. I could probably get 0 out of 10 for this talk. Then something happened that changed everything else. A feeling of sadness swept over me. Everyone in the room felt it, and they all felt sad. Then someone screamed. It was the leg. It was standing there at the door. It hopped across the room. My hands were shaking so much I dropped the shoe. The leg hopped across the platform and into the shoe. It wanted a shoe. Sue Featherstone looked at the skeleton leg and started shouting, "Get rid of it! Get rid of the horrible thing!" The leg started hopping towards her. It hopped right up onto her desk. She screamed and screamed. Then she ran for the door. Everyone else had the same idea. They all ran for the door at the same time. There was lots of yelling and pushing. They were all trying to get out the door at once. They were scared out of their wits. The leg bones chased the whole class across the playground and down the street. Never heard so much yelling and screaming in my life. I was left alone in the classroom with Mr. Bush. He just sat there shaking his head. After a while he said, "I don't know how you did it, Brian, but it was a good trick. I'll give you 10 out of 10 for that talk. 10 out of 10. "Thanks, Mr. Bush, without a shirt," I said. When I got home from school, the leg was waiting for me. It was just standing there in the corner of my room. It didn't move at all. But it was so sad. It made me sad. I felt as if it were my skeleton. I felt as if my bones were being washed away by the waves, as if they were being scattered along a sandy beach. I knew that this was what had happened to Ben Byron. His bones had been washed up and scattered along Lady Bay Beach. I looked at Shovel. "We have to find the rest of the bones," I said. "This leg will never have peace until all the bones are together again. We have to find the rest of the bones, and we have to find them now," without a shirt. I took a spade and a sack and walked across the beach. Shovel came with me and so did the leg. It hopped slowly behind us, making a plopping sound as it came. It still had the shoe on. It was lucky that there was no one on the beach. They wouldn't have believed their eyes if they'd seen a boy, a dog, and a skeleton leg walking along the beach. I could hardly believe it myself. I didn't know where to start looking, but the leg did. It hopped along the beach and stood still where it wanted us to dig. We spent all afternoon following the leg around and digging holes. In every hole we found some bones. Went as fast as I could. I wanted to get rid of the sad feeling. Tears were running down my face because I was so unhappy. Every time we found some more bones, I put them in the sack. The bones were glad to be together. I could tell that, but they were still sad. They would not be happy until I found the last one. After a long time I found the last one. It was the skull. It was in a hole with an old shirt. A very old shirt. I'd never seen one like it before. I put the skull and the shirt in the sack. Then I held open the top. The leg hopped into the sack with the other bones. The feeling of sadness went as soon as the leg joined the other bones. The bones were happy. I was happy, and so was Shovel. Now, I said to Shovel, we have a job to do. We have to bury all the bones in the same hole without a shirt. I carried the bag of happy bones to a lonely place in the sand dunes. Shovel and I started to dig a hole. We worked at it for hours and hours. At last it was deep enough. I took the bag of bones and tipped them into the grave. They fell into a pile at the bottom. Then they started to move. They slithered around at the bottom of the hole. I should have felt scared, but I didn't. I knew what was happening. The bones were joining up into a skeleton. After a while it was finished. The skeleton was whole. It lay still at the bottom of the grave, looking up at me. It didn't look as if it was at peace. There was something else. It wanted something else. I looked in the sack. The shirt was still there. I threw the shirt into the hole. Don't worry, I said. I won't bury you without a shirt. The bones started to move for the last time. The skeleton moved onto its side with the shirt under its head. It was in a sleeping position. It was very happy. Music seemed to come up out of the grave. Silent music, but I could hear it in my head. We filled in the grave and smoothed down the sand. Decided to say a few words. After all, it was a sort of funeral. I looked out to sea. Could feel tears in my eyes. This is what I said. Here lie the bones of Ben Byron, at peace at last, beside this beautiful bay. Shovel looked up at me. He seemed to be smiling. Hey, I yelled. I didn't mention a shirt. I didn't say it. And I never did again.